Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So picking up where we left off, let's just kind of rewind back first before we proceed. So everything begins with what's known as the kalimatun, or a word. So when we delve into this concept further, we realize that in the Arabic language, there are three types of words, right? So we have a fa'il, which is essentially an action word, or in English, that would be a verb. Then we have a harf, which is a small word which has an impact on the context or meaning of a word that comes after it. Then we have an ism, which is essentially in essence a supernoun. So it's anything that's not a harf or a fa'il. So that includes person, place, thing, adjective, adverb, and so forth. So we went from dealing with a single word, we broke it down into three types. Now, we decided that we'd zoom in on the ism itself and we discussed the properties of the ism. So we said the properties of the ism are four. The first is definiteness, and that can be divided into the ism being specific or non-specific. So are we dealing with something that is known, or are we dealing with something that's general? The book versus a book. The second property was gender. So is the ism at hand, is it a male or female? And we said when it came to female that there were 8 particular signs, and if none of those signs were hit, then we'd be dealing with a male ism. And then we said that there was number, so it could be singular, dual, or plural, and plural could be further broken down into sound plural and broken plural. Then we said there was status, which told us essentially the ending of the word, which gives us an indication of what the purpose of the ism is in the sentence. Right? So we studied all four of these in detail. Now, the next thing that we're moving on to is fragments. So what exactly is a fragment? So we had letters that we began with. We put letters together to construct words. Then now we're putting together words to construct fragments. And fragments in essence are broken sentences. So to understand what a fragment is, we then have to understand what a sentence is. And a sentence is made up of two parts. There is the subject, which is the thing that you are speaking about. Then there's the predicate, which is some type of information about it. Right? So two main parts, the subject and the predicate. The thing that you're focusing on, and then some information about it. So an example of this would be the class is easy. So now the class would be our subject. It's the thing that we're focused on. And then what are we saying about it? We're saying that it's easy. Now is in English is just an auxiliary verb which is inserted in there to connect the subject and the predicate. That's just a small point there. So there's two parts that we're dealing with. We're dealing with the subject, so the class, and then some piece of information about it. It's that it's easy, right? So then once again, we have the teacher. Well, what about the teacher? The teacher is late, right? So we have subject, predicate. The old house. Well, what can you tell me about the old house? Is strong, right? That car. Well, what about that car? Is nice, right? So we're going to have our subject, which is the thing that we're talking about, then some piece of information about it. So now when it comes to fragments, what's important to understand is that it's always missing one of those two parts. It's always going to have either the subject missing or it's going to have the predicate missing, and it's going to leave you asking a question. So that house, right? So we have something there that's similar to a subject. We're left asking the question, well, what about it? Right? So that house on its own is an incomplete sentence. Therefore, it will be a fragment. It leaves us asking that question. Well, what about it? What's the information about it? In the lake. Well, what is in the lake? What's the subject that we're focusing on? What are we really talking about, right? So if I were to say the boy is in the lake, then the boy would be the subject. Then in the lake would be a piece of information about it. Since the boy is missing from there, in the lake will be a fragment, right? It's incomplete. We don't know what exactly the full idea is that's being communicated here. The yellow cow. Well, tell me something about the yellow cow, right? The predicate in this case is missing. So we're dealing then with a fragment. So there are four types of fragments, similar to how we studied the four types of isms. There are the four properties of an ism. Now we'll be studying the four types of fragments. So the first is a prepositional fragment. The second is an association fragment. The third is a pointing fragment. and the fourth is a descriptive fragment. And we're going to study all of these in detail as time goes on in the coming weeks, inshallah. What we're doing right now is really just a quick survey of all these things to give you guys a overview or a type of forest before the trees perspective. So, what's a prepositional fragment? A prepositional fragment is created by using words such as like, with, on, to, in. Essentially, these words are what are known as prepositions, and they'll be inserted, and whatever comes after it will be attached to it, right? So the preposition plus whatever comes after it is always going to go back to an action or a statement or some type of doer, in essence, right? And that on its own will be a prepositional fragment. So really what matters is knowing that there's going to be a prepositional word, like, with, on, to, and in, and we're going to memorize a whole list of them, and whatever comes after it is also going to be a part of that fragment. And together, those two components will make up the prepositional fragment. So, on the couch, right? Prepositional fragment. To, home. From the masjid, right? So the giveaway of a prepositional fragment is always going to be one of those special words, right? One of those prepositions. And we're going to study those in detail in Arabic. There's about 17 of them, and we have a little nice way of memorizing them, inshallah ta'ala. So it's just literally going to be like in the future, you see a ba, you're going to know whatever comes after it's part of the prepositional fragment. You put those two together, you have your prepositional fragment. You see ila, same thing. You see ala, same thing. You see wow, same thing. Right, so these are different things that we're going to learn in the coming lessons, inshallah. So an association fragment is essentially when you have two isms that are coming together and they have been joined together through an association. So what does this look like in English? So we'd have our first ism, which would be like book, and then our second, which would be the lab jalal. And then of is brought to create an association between them. So the book of Allah, right? So the book is associated to Allah, right? So there's an association between the two. And one way of achieving that in English is to insert of between two isms, where you have the thing that's being associated, then you have the thing that it's being associated to. So the thing that's being associated in this case is book, and the thing that's being associated to is the lab jalal. And of is inserted in between to show that association. This is achieved a little differently in Arabic because they don't have of, but we'll show you how to create that construction. Another way that it's achieved in English is with the possessive s. So what you'll have is the thing that's being associated to will come first, then the possessive s will come, and then the thing that's being associated will come afterwards, right? So Allah's book, Muhammad's message, right? So it's always going to be the thing that's being associated to will come first, then you'll have the prepositional s, right, that shows that association, and then you'll have the thing that's being associated, right? And this might sound a little bit theoretical, but in practice, when you look at examples, a lot of it really clicks because it's not that complex. Okay, another example is his book, right? So then we have pointing fragments, which in essence is when you take a pointing word, so this, that, those, or these, and right after it comes whatever you're pointing to. So that house, this book, these people, those keys. And the last one, which is something that we're all extremely familiar with, is a descriptive fragment, was essentially when you have an adjective, which is a descriptive word, so it could be like a color, it could be an attribute, it could be a characteristic, and then you have the thing coming after it, which is being described. Simple example, blue car, right? So you have your characteristic, attribute, description that comes first, descriptive word that comes first, and then after the thing that's being described. So blue car, big house, small town, and so forth. And those are the 4 fragments that we're going to be covering in detail in the coming lessons. That was just a quick survey overview of how they manifest in English. What we're going to be studying in depth now is how they manifest in Arabic, and we're going to be going through each of them in a lot of detail. So if some of this did feel a little bit overwhelming, don't worry. The purpose of this was just to give you an example of the forest before the trees. Feel free to watch this over as many times as you'd like and ask questions, inshallah. Hope this was of some benefit. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.